Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Rundown. I will be your host today, Craig Deluz, coming at you from Gun Rights Policy Conference 2025 here in Salt Lake City, Utah, where advocates for the Second Amendment are getting together from all over the country. And as I like to tell you, as I've always told you, GRPC is great because you get a chance to meet the people who are on the ground fighting the fight every day from across the country. But right now, we have with us a gentleman who is, well, not too far from where I'm at in Sacramento. I know, I like to say Sacramento is the belly of the beast. Well, that's the belly of the beast where all the policymakers get together. But if you want to know kind of the heart of the anti-gun left, there's a huge chunk of it right there in the San Francisco Bay Area and the South Bay. And I have with me a gentleman who is active in fighting the fight there in that community. His name is Johnny Lee Dang. Johnny, how are you doing today?
Very good. How are you doing?
I am doing phenomenal. So you came up and you shared with me a little bit of information about this group called Operation Sentinel.
Yes.
And I got to say, it sounds interesting. It sounds very fine. It sounds like you guys are fighting a serious fight there in the San Francisco Bay Area and in the South Bay. Tell me a little bit about it.
So I'm very active in politics. I've actually worked in politics my entire life, and I'm an advocate for the Second Amendment. I view that it's a part of our American way of life. It's a part of our Constitution, or at least the Bill of Rights, and it has been fundamental to how our country has been built and developed. And my heritage, my family's Vietnamese, and my father's Chinese, and my mother's Vietnamese. And I kind of wonder, I kind of think sometimes that it would have been different, and when the Japanese invaded China, if the Chinese had their Second Amendment rights, or they had the right to bear arms, or if the Chinese communists, when they took over that country, if they had the ability to defend themselves, or if the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese had the Second Amendment or something similar to that, so that they can defend themselves, would that be the same situation? Would things have ended up the way it did? And because of that, I always felt that the principles here in America has made it so that we are able to defend ourselves from either political prosecution with the ability to speak up against our government, or with the Second Amendment. I always felt that it is probably something, and I really do believe it is actually something fundamental to our way of life here, and our ability to be free. And so, as an advocate for the Second Amendment and even the First Amendment, I work in politics to defend our rights. And I really feel like in California, from the First Amendment to the Second Amendment, our rights have been violated by our government. They do not let us speak up, and whether it's the government or even the social class in California that doesn't allow us to speak up, and to the Second Amendment, definitely in California, I really feel like our rights have been infringed on. And so I took it upon myself to stand up for our rights in California and stand up for Asian Americans. Asian Americans have traditionally been a class of people who are actually newer to America. If you look at back in our history, Asian Americans have really only started coming over here since the end of the Vietnam War. Prior to that, there were some groups of Asian Americans who have come over here. But if you look at what happened, actually, there's a lot of things in the American history that people don't even know about. For example, the Chinese Exclusion Act. Many Chinese were actually excluded from coming over to this country for many decades. And they actually ended up moving over to Canada and Mexico because of that. A lot of them had been coming over to the United States prior to that. Actually, let's get into the history if you guys don't know about this. But Chinese Americans started coming over here after the First and Second Opium War. And the Chinese, or the Americans and the British, a lot of times the Americans don't even know, but the Americans were involved in the Opium Wars, and some of them were disguised as British. They spoke English, so they didn't, really know the difference. But many of the Americans were involved in the First and Second Opium Wars, and they actually forced the Chinese to take in opium and trade it. They're calling it free trade, and they're saying that the Chinese must take and trade this stuff so that they quite frankly, the traders would make money off the Chinese gold and silver. And because of that war, they forced the Chinese to open up their ports, and in doing so, they forced them to trade with the West. And so in doing so, the Chinese started coming over to America to trade with them. And what would they do? They brought over opium to trade with the Americans, right? And the Americans weren't happy about that. That's why when you hear about those stories about the Chinese opium dens here in Chinatowns in America, were full of, they're full of opium, and they're selling opium. Was like, yes, well, you forced us to trade opium.
You forced us to trade, so
that's right.
We're going to give you what we got.
That's right. You said you wanted to trade with us.
It's not like nobody wants it.
So they brought opium over here, and they started trading the opium in their Chinatowns in America. And because of that, they started saying, oh, look, Chinese are bringing opium here, bringing drugs over here to trade with us. And we're like, wait a second. Or they were like, wait a second. You wanted us to trade with you. You forced us to trade opium. And so we did that. And because of that and some other incidences that happened here in California, there was something called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And that forced the people in China or from China who came over here, because a lot of them didn't get the news right away. And so the ships they just kept coming. And when they came over to California, we didn't allow them to come on land and settle here. So they actually forced them to go to Mexico and Canada. Many of them were farmers. And because they were farmers, they actually ended up going to Mexico and started farming in Mexico. And actually, if you didn't know this, there's actually a lot of connection between the heroin epidemic that happened in the South, as well with the connection with the Chinese. Because what happened? They came over here to sell us opium. The Americans, they didn't allow them to come to America. So they went down to Mexico, and the Mexicans were not happy with the United States at the same time because of the Mexican-American War. And so the Mexicans and the Chinese actually teamed up to sell heroin to the Southerners in South America, or not South America, in Southern United States and through the South. And so that epidemic, if anything, has continued into today. If you get into the heroin black tar epidemic that happened in the early 1900s, all the way until now with the fentanyl crisis, a lot of that stemmed from what happened in the 1850s when the United States didn't allow them to come over here. And they are the ones who forced the Chinese to open their markets to trade opium, making the Chinese come over here. And then when we didn't allow them to trade the opium, they went over to Mexico and they started bringing it over to the South.
So now tell me about Operation Sentinel specifically.
The Operation Sentinel has nothing to do with everything we just talked about. But I was just giving you guys a little lesson about, Asian American history. But since the Asian Americans actually, most of the people who come over from Asia traditionally were from China. But then after World War II, a lot of them were Japanese Americans who started coming over here, as well as Filipino Americans started coming over here as well after the Spanish American War. And at that time, the Philippines was actually under control of the Spaniards. And when the United States took over the Philippines, or took over the Philippines took over control of the Philippines from the Spaniards, and a lot of Filipinos started coming here after the turn of the century in the 1900s. And so we really had those small groups of Asian Americans coming over here. The Vietnamese Americans started coming over here in about 1970s after the Vietnam War, as well as all the other Southeast Asian countries. Is due to the refugee crisis that happened after the Vietnam War. And so because of that, Asian Americans are actually somewhat a newer class of people who have come over here.
Right.
And since then, we were not really given the same protections as other classes of Americans. My example would be, because I grew up during that his time, the Rodney King riots that happened in LA. And actually, there was some stuff happening in San Diego that wasn't even on the news. And then there was stuff happening across the nation that wasn't on the news either. But as a nation, we actually let other ethnic groups fend for themselves. And because we let them fend for themselves, we didn't get the same equal protections that other groups did.
Right.
My example is the Rodney King riots, because during that time, if you look at when the riots started happening, they allowed the burning and the looting of the Koreatown to continue. And while they had stopped the looting and the burning of the rest of the communities in LA, mainly the white communities, but they continued and they let it continue in the Korean part of town, and then what happens is the Koreans have to defend themselves.
Right.
If you really get into the gang crisis, at least from the Asian perspective, the Asian gang crisis in the 1990s, a lot of that stemmed from actually the white community, white police officers not defending the Asian communities. So the Asian communities, the people there, they said that, listen, if the white people aren't going to defend us, we're going to build gangs and defend ourselves. Okay.
Right.
And so if anything, there's not a lot of history about why that happened, but I know from experience, because I was growing up around that time, my brothers and sisters were defending themselves from other ethnic communities, whether it be black, white, or even Mexican. We were being picked on. We were traditionally a lower, smaller class of people, and because of that, we made ourselves easier to be victims of crime. And without the police actually defending us, we had to take it upon ourselves to defend our own communities, just like what happened with Koreatown. And now with the situation with the smash and grab robberies all over the Bay Area, I feel like it's an opportunity / it's not an opportunity, but obligation for us to defend ourselves again, because the government's not doing anything for us. And so this Operation Sentinel is about us Asian Americans defending our communities again. We are training Asian American business owners to get education on firearms from A to Z, as well as training them to practice it and use their Second Amendment rights to defend their businesses and their personal lives from harm that's happening all over the Bay Area. This isn't just the Bay Area right now. It's actually extending down to Southern California more and more. And the government, quite frankly, hasn't done anything about it. If you look at Prop 36, that was a proposition passed by the voters of this state overwhelmingly. I believe it's over 2/3, nearly 3/4 of the
Every
state.
single county in California, including Los Angeles and San Francisco County, voted to approve it.
Yes. And so it was approved. And we had nobody saying that we didn't want more public safety. We didn't say that we wanted these more and more smash and grabs. But what happens? The second it gets to the governor's office, the governor Newsom says, "Oh, guess what? We don't have money to fund it."
Decided he's not going to fund it.
Yeah, he's not going to fund it.
I'm not going to implement the law. He's like, I'm not going to implement the law because I'm just going to make sure there's no money for it.
Yes. And so, I mean, they have money for all these other programs, a lot of which that a lot of Californians don't agree with. But something they do agree with, something fundamental to our public safety, to our rights, to the way of life, he's not going to fund it. And so, because of that, we're fighting that. We're also fighting the CCW fees, which is the concealed carry fees in Santa Clara County. Again, it's one of those liberal policies that they have in California that makes it difficult for people to own guns. And our argument against that is that CCW
Real quick. Tell the audience how much the CCW fees are.
Yes. So in Santa Clara County, the CCW fees are $2,000. Okay.
$1,000.
Right. So if you want to have a gun and be able to defend yourself, you're going to have to pay $2,000.
And that's every 2 years.
Yes. Every 2 years. And so if you look at other cities, other counties in California, as well as the rest of the United States, you're looking at maybe $60 to $70 fee. Okay, that's a fee that most people can afford. Well, obviously, they're making it so that people won't buy guns, so that, quite frankly, they can't defend themselves. But they don't see it from that perspective. Of course, they see it from the perspective of trying to keep the community safe. But my argument is this: if you look at the statistics, okay, from 1998 to 2022, there was 5 incidences of CCW holders, concealed carry permit holders, right, actually committing homicide using their weapons, whether it be justifiable homicide or not. You compare it to 19,000, right, homicides in the state of California in the same amount of time. There are 200,000 CCW holders, right? That's a rate of 1 in 31 million incidences comparatively for CCW holders to commit, that commit homicide or incidents of homicide, which is a sign that CCW holders are actually one of the safest groups of people, most law-abiding groups of people in this entire country of state, if not the world. Okay. Those people are not the people who are committing crimes. Once you get a concealed carry permit, you have to register your firearm, you have to get fingerprinted, and there's a whole host of things you have to do to keep that.
There have been study after study that's demonstrated that concealed carry permit holders are among the most law-abiding citizens in the entire country. And by the way, even more so than law enforcement.
Yeah, that's right. That is actually correct. The CCW holders are less likely to commit homicide, to actually even use their gun in situations like that. They're more likely to rain down and just be more cautious, but they're actually even more law-abiding than even law enforcement officers themselves.
Well, it's funny. What I'll say, what I like about this program, what you're talking about, is America is unique in that there are various different peoples who come here from all over the world. And it's the sort of thing where, as I always like to say, we bring diverse cultures here. And, the left likes to say that, well, diversity is our strength. And I always I prefer to put it this way. Unity is our strength, right? Diversity, if we can find the things around which we unify, then diversity becomes our strength. But if diversity leads to division, then it's not a strength. But if we can have our diversity and still have unity and strength, and what I like about what you're talking about is these are people who are getting together. You still celebrate your culture, but you're also coming together and you're doing what is a very American thing. You're not depending on the government to take care of you, to protect you. You're saying we're going to protect ourselves. We're going to be our own first responders. And then on top of that, now you're saying we're going to come together as a community and we're going to seek redress from our government for our rights, not just for you, not just for your community, but for all Californians, for all people there in Santa Clara County. That also is a very unique American principle. And I have to take my hat off to the work you guys are doing. Now, you were telling me about a gun confiscation thing or a gun grab that's been taking place there in Santa Clara County. No. Okay. All right. Then I was incorrect in my assessment. But the concealed carry permit thing is a huge thing. $2,000 every 2 years. Now, do they require any like of a psychological test and all of that?
Yes, a part of that $2,000 actually is a $500 psychological assessment, as well as they have other rules and restrictions that, quite frankly, just make it really difficult to have a concealed carry permit. I'll give you an example. I can't get one in Santa Clara County because they require my ex-wife to sign off and give a letter of recommendation so that I can have one. Quite frankly, I was married over 20 years ago, and my ex-wife and me,
Wait, your ex-wife.
my ex-wife has to give a recommendation for me to have a concealed carry permit in Santa Clara County.
Now, I know nothing about your personal business, but I'm assuming your ex is an ex for a reason.
Yes.
Why someone would expect that would expect someone who is your ex for a reason to then sign off for you to, I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I can somewhat kind of understand if it's been within 1 or 2 or 3 years and I got divorced or something like that. But I was divorced.
Or if there was a case of domestic violence, right? Something
in
like that.
Case. But there was no domestic violence. It was just she's my ex-wife from 20 years ago, and we don't have a great relationship, as friends since then. And it's been 20 years. I don't even talk to her. But I need her to give me a letter of recommendation, for me to get a concealed carry permit in Santa Clara County. So again, it's one of those regulations that make it difficult for people to have firearms in the state of California.
And all of this, folks, is for perceived safety. And the reality is that the people who commit crimes with guns, they don't bother to get a permit. In fact,
That's right.
most of them don't even bother to get their guns legally.
Yeah.
They don't go to a gun store. They just buy it out of the trunk of someone's car.
That's right.
They're generally illegally purchased firearms. They don't, I think something like 95 or 96% of all firearms that are recovered at the scene of a crime were not in the possession of the person who was the registered owner of the firearm.
Mm-hmm.
This complete utter disconnect between what the gun laws they propose are and what they claim that they're going to do and what they actually do.
Yeah. There's statistics that actually don't lie in this situation, but they show that people who are CCW holders, people who actually lawfully buy their guns, are not the ones committing the crimes. It's the criminals who do not follow the law, and the ones who are not getting their guns registered. Obviously, people who are going out of their ways to register their guns and getting these permits are not the ones committing the crime, because at that point you have so much risk involved in using that firearm for illegal purposes. I mean, quite frankly, if these people were trying to do it to use them for crimes, they wouldn't actually be registering for the guns, as opposed to the criminals, of course, who don't register it, who just get buy it off the street. They're not going to even go down that route.
All right, so what do folks do? How do they contact you? How do they learn more about Operation Sentinel? What if there's people in other parts of the country that are interested in starting a chapter or connecting with your organization and starting whatever they want to do, starting that there? How can they find you?
It's funny. I haven't even thought about expanding this or starting other chapters. I have thought about expanding it from Northern California down to Central Valley and then down to Los Angeles County. But there has been a lot of support from people who I've talked to. And if people are interested in trying to do something like this in their county, just reach out to me. You can find me on Facebook or Google, even Johnny Lee Dang. And I'm out there. You can message me on the social media and stuff like that. I actually probably claimed a Johnny Lee Dang on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. So I'm the only guy with that name, Johnny Lee Dang, Johnny Lee Lee Dang, Dang. And you can find me on social media. And if I have enough support and if you're really interested, we can expand this program to wherever you're located.
Right. Folks, this is vitally important. We need to be active and we need to be engaged. And, all of us are going to find our areas or places where we can get comfortable. And for some people, that's identifying with their community. That's identifying whether it's geographical, whether it's religious, whether it's ethnic, whether it's their career, their industry, whatever they do. But if you can go to somebody in their community that they're comfortable with and you can get them to advocate for the right to keep and bear arms, all Americans benefit. So I want to encourage you, if you know somebody who you think might be interested, connect them with Johnny. Share this video with them. Let them know about it. And because I think this is something that is definitely worth doing. Johnny, I want to thank you for coming on the program.
I want to thank you.
Hopefully we'll have you on sometime in the future after we see how things are going.
I hope you do. And I hope I have something to tell you good in the future about this too.
I am quite sure we're going to have something good to talk about. All right, folks, that's going to be it for this episode of The Rundown. We're going to have more interviews coming in the future from folks here at the Gun Rights Policy Conference 2025. Till then, y'all have fun, stay safe, and we will talk to you later.
Do you have any?